it will always remain as it is at that particular time and place, though there may be some new things take place as we go along in that. In the book of Genesis, you have the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. But as we come to the 21st chapter of Revelation, we have the regenesis. We have a new heaven and a new earth. In the book of Genesis, we have paradise lost. In the book of Revelation, we have paradise restored. And so this is the great part of the book of Revelation. We have seen in our last lesson how that it said there in verse 11 that the earth and the heaven fled away from the face of God that sat upon the great white throne. Now there are some things that happened there that we're not told about. I believe that during this time, between Revelation 20 and verse 11 and here in chapter 21 and verse 1, you have the burning up of the world by fire. I believe that the earth is going to be given a baptism in fire, just like that it was given a baptism in water back during the days of Noah. Now, note with me what Peter says about that. Before we read the lesson here in Revelation, let's look in 2 Peter chapter 3. I want you to note there, we're going to start, let's look at verse 7 first of all. But the heavens and the earth which are now, that's the present heaven and earth that we know, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Now you'll note there that the time that the earth is going to burn is during the time of the judgment and the perdition of ungodly men. That would be nothing less than the white throne of judgment, the time when the unsaved are consigned to hell for all eternity, or the lake of fire. So now the present heaven and earth is reserved unto fire. That fire is going to burn at the very time that the unsaved are being judged. The very time they're going to be cast in the lake of fire. Then he gives us a great promise there about the Lord's coming, verse 9. Then he goes on down to verse 10, 2 Peter 3 now. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, into which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. The burning of the world, look at it. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hastening unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens, being on fire, shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness. So now Peter speaks of the same time that John will tell us about. But Peter gives us some information that John is not so clear on. John says that the heaven and the earth fled away. That's all he says. He doesn't tell us what caused them to do that. But Peter seems to fill in the gap, because he tells us that they're going to be burned by fire. Evidently that same fire that will fall on Gog and Magog at the last rebellion will be the same fire that will not only burn up these armies of the devil, but will burn up the earth as well. And after that we're told about the new heaven and the new earth. And do you note something? When he's discussing the great white throne of judgment, it's not on earth and it's not in heaven. Why? Because they're burning, you see. It's out in space at a great white throne, prepared for that particular purpose. So you see, even the lost as well as the saved will be taken far out into space, while the atmospheric heaven burns and while the earth burns. And that will be taking place. One of them will burn up. The wicked are being judged. Peter said you have the fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. And then Peter goes right on to tell us there that we'll have these new heavens and new earth wherein will dwell righteousness. So I think that's when it's going to take place. Now, if I don't answer this question right here, somebody's sure to ask it when our lesson is over tonight. People say, do you believe that the world's literally going to burn up so that it won't be anything left? The whole planet's going to burn. No, it will not, as I understand it. Was the planet destroyed when the flood came? Now we grant that the contour of the land was changed. Great events took place. Earthquakes and all of that, no doubt, when the fountains of the deep broke up. But the planet itself was not destroyed. But the exterior surface was completely changed. And all the inhabitants of the world drowned at that time. Another reason why that I believe that it's not going to burn up, that is the planet itself, is because there in verse 10 of Peter, he said, the heavens shall pass away. The word pass away there in the Greek text is parachromia. Parachromia. And the word parachromia means to go or to move along. It does not necessarily mean annihilation. For instance, in Acts the 16th chapter, in verse 8, it said that the Apostle Paul passed from one place to another in a ship. It's the word parachromia. So I believe it would suggest the idea of the changing of the exterior surface, but not the complete annihilation of this planet Earth. Someone said, well, it says there it's going to pass away, and there's no place found for it. In the present form, there's not. But it says God created a new one, a new heaven and a new earth. Well, He did, in the sense that He recreated them. Otherwise than what they will be after they're burned by fire. They'll be judged then and severely destroyed. They'll have to be recreated. But it will still leave the planet itself. Someone said, well, now how can you be so sure? The Bible makes it very plain, I believe, 3 other places. In the book of Ecclesiastes, look at chapter 1 and verse 4. One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. How long is forever? Well, it means it'll never cease to be. Very well. Now let me show you another scripture that proves that the earth will never be completely destroyed. Look in the book of Psalms 104, I believe it is. Psalms 104 and verse 5. I thought verse 5. Who laid the foundations of the earth that it should not be removed forever. So the earth as a planet will never be destroyed. The foundations of the earth are forever. Now there's another reason why that this earth can't be burned up. You see, God has promised the nation of Israel that they're going to have the land of Palestine, how long? Forever. So then you can't burn up that land if they're going to live on it forever. So how do you know they're going to be there forever? Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 25, listen. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given unto Jacob my servant, wherein your fathers have dwelt, and they shall dwell therein, even they and their children and their children's children forever. Forever. And my servant David shall be their prince forever. So that's why I have to take the position that the earth will be recreated so far as the exterior surface is concerned. But the planet itself will not be annihilated. But you will have a new heaven and a new earth, and God will create it. Not in the sense that He's going to make the planet over entirely, but He's going to redo the exterior surface. Like you'd put a new job on the outside of your house. You'd redo it on the outside. He's going to redo the planet Earth on the outside all the way around, the whole globe. Everything will be changed all over the exterior surface. But He will not destroy the very foundations of the earth, for they're to be there forever. So I wanted to establish that and answer those questions before we go into our study. You say, well, you've given quite an introduction here. Well, I felt like that it was necessary. Because I want you to see that when He speaks here of a new heaven and a new earth, He's speaking about the exterior surface of the earth and not the planet itself. And that's all that really makes any sense when you think about it. Now, if I wanted to give a quick outline of the lesson tonight, and we probably won't go down any more than to verse 7, and we'll just stop there even in the outline. You have a new heaven and a new earth in verse 1. And then you have a vision of the new Jerusalem in verse 2. And then in verse 3 and 4, you have the tabernacle of God with men. And then as you go on down to verse 5 and 6, you have all things made new. And then in verse 7, we have all the blessings that God will give to the overcomer. And really verse 8 tells us about those that will not be a part of this new order. We probably won't go that far. Let's begin now in Revelation 21 at verse 1. We have that very common Johannine expression, I saw, in the panoramic vision of the end time. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. Three definite facts stated there. First of all, there's a new heaven. Secondly, there's a new earth. And upon this new earth, there is no large bodies of water. There's no great seas like the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Indian Ocean that we have today. There are no large bodies of water. Now let's take a few moments and go back and just meditate on that statement there. A new heaven and a new earth. Peter told us about a new heaven and a new earth, wherein there would dwell righteousness. But you know, he's not the only one that told us about that, because there are many other scriptures in the Bible that speak of that time. Look in the book of Isaiah. There are scriptures there that tell us about this new heaven and the new earth that God is going to build. In Isaiah 65 and verse 17, for behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered, nor come into mind. Isaiah 65 verse 17. Then look in chapter 66 verse 22. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. You note the word heavens is in the plural there in Isaiah both times. That means the atmospheric heaven of the earth is going to be made new, but it means that even the second heaven will be made new, the stellar system, where now the kingdom of the devil is. Even that's going to be made new. And there's a change there that I have no light on from the Word of God that I'd like to know more about. But I know in the light of those two verses in Isaiah that even the very kingdom of the devil that's out now somewhere in the second heaven, out there where we see the stars and the moon and all these things, all of that's going to be made new. Because he said new heavens in the plural. New heavens in the plural. So somebody said, now, well, why is God going to have to make a new heaven? Well, certainly God will never need to make a new third heaven where he dwells and where the throne of God is. There's nothing wrong with that heaven. But there is a problem in the second heaven because the kingdom of the devil is there. We read there in our Sunday school lesson, Ephesians 6, verse 12, how that these wicked spirits are what? In heavenly places up in the second heaven. They come down here to the atmospheric heaven of this earth. Now, why is God going to have to make a new heaven? Because the present heaven and the present earth has been defiled by sin. It's been defiled by sin. I'll show you what has happened to it. Back over here in the book of Job in the Old Testament, in the 15th chapter, and verse 15, I want you to note what's said. Behold, he putteth no trust in his saints. The word saints there is holy ones. It can be angels, and probably is here. Yea, the heavens, note that is plural number. Yea, the heavens are not clean in his sight. The atmospheric heaven's not clean. The devil can enter that. And the second heaven's not clean because that's where his kingdom is. And then the passage there in Ephesians 6 and 12 makes it very plain that you have wicked spirits today in the heavenly places. Revelation 12, verse 7 to 9 says that during the middle of the tribulation, the devil is going to be cast out of heaven, see? Cast out of heaven, down to the earth. So God is going to have to make a new heaven and a new earth because this present heaven and this present earth has been defiled by sin. Man is a sinner, angels are sinners, and the devil is a sinner. And God must purge it all by fire in order to make it pure, and therefore must create a new heaven and a new earth, you see. Did not Jesus speak of that time in Matthew 24 when he said there, and well, first of all, he said in verse 29, the very powers of heaven shall be shaken. They'll be shaken when it melts by fervent heat. The powers of heaven will be shaken. The elements will melt with fervent heat. And then did he not go on to say in verse 35 that heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. Well, what are we seeing here in Revelation 21 and verse 1? We're seeing the time that Jesus spoke of when the heavens and the earth would pass away, but not the Bible. The heaven and the earth will pass away, but not the Bible. The Bible is an eternal book. It's an indestructible book. It'll last longer than the heavens. It'll last longer than the earth. Because this is the time that Jesus spoke of when he said that heaven and earth shall pass away. And what did John say there? The heaven and the earth are new. And he said the first heaven and the first earth were what? Passed away. The very word that our Lord used. This is the time that he referred to. This is the time that he referred to. Somebody said, well, now why will there not be any sea on the new earth? You know today that 2/3 of the world is water. The sea, as beautiful as it may be to the eye to look at, is really not suitable for human habitation. You can't live out on the sea. You can in a ship, but it's rather inconvenient in many respects. Can you imagine what it would be like if all of the seas were dried up and you could inhabit the whole earth? A lot of people worry about, well, how are you going to put all these people that's lived all the way from Adam down to the last man that lives, how are you going to put them all on this earth? Well, you can put them all on the whole earth, because it's going to be about 3 or 4 times larger than it is now for people to live on. See, they don't think about that. And after all, it's going to be a new one too, so it might be enlarged a little bit, who knows? So there's not going to be any problem about that. Somebody said, well, if there's not going to be any seas, there'll be a lot of things that won't be on this new earth. There won't be any marine life, that's right. Won't be any shrimp, won't be anything that lives in the sea, none of the fish that we know now. More than that, there won't be any places for ships to go. You won't need any ships. More than that, you won't have anybody dying in a storm out in the sea either, because there won't be any sea. You know, during the tribulation, Jesus said the sea and the waves would roar, but there will be no sea and no waves roar in the new heaven and the new earth. No more sea. So the sea has been the means of death to many, many people. How many people have died in the sea? How many ships have gone down, and men on board those ships have died? Well, the Lord only knows, but a large number of people have gone down in the sea. It's been a means of death. There in the 20th chapter, we saw how that the sea would give up the dead that were in it. And so here we see a time that there will not be any more sea. The sea is completely gone forever. Somebody said, well, now, suppose the sea's gone, will there be any rivers? Will there be any bodies of water whatsoever? Yes, there will be one river that we know about for sure. It's the one in the 22nd chapter that's called the river of the water of life that flows down through the city of Jerusalem. But there is no other river mentioned in the new heaven and the new earth. Now, you do have rivers in the millennial state, but you only have one in the eternal state. You don't have any seas in the eternal state, but you do have seas in the millennial state. So we know that what we're reading about here in the 21st chapter is not the millennium. This is a post-millennial scene. And this is the time when there are not any more seas in the world. During the time of the millennium, the Lord is said to reign from the river unto the ends of the earth. And His kingdom is said to be from sea to sea and all of that. But there are no seas in the new heaven and the new earth. So this is not the millennial state. This is the post-millennial state. The millennium's expired. This is the eternal state, as we call it. For the only river that we know about for sure will be in that holy city, and it will be the pure river of the water of life. Now let's pass on down to verse 2, because here we're going to see something about the vision of the holy city. Now he will give the details of the city down, beginning in verse 11. But right now he just mentions the city as he sees it coming down from God out of heaven to the earth. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now what is this holy city, the New Jerusalem? In Isaiah chapter 52 and verse 1, the old city of Jerusalem is called the holy city, the Jerusalem, that existed in the Old Testament. But now this is a new Jerusalem. It is something like the old Jerusalem, but not entirely like it, because it's called a new Jerusalem. The old Jerusalem was many times called a holy city, but it has never had holy inhabitants. It has been the scene of war, sin, and various things over the years. But the new Jerusalem will be a city that will have holy inhabitants and will truly be the holy city. And here's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and it's going to have on it a new city. There are three new things already mentioned: new heaven, new earth, new city. And this is called New Jerusalem. You know, Paul spoke of that city in Galatians chapter 4. In verse 26, he called it to Jerusalem, which is above. Now, why did he say which is above? Because John sees it what? Coming from God out of heaven. Right now, then, it's in heaven, see, in the third heaven where God is. It's in the third heaven where God is. And so John sees the time that the Lord takes it from heaven and brings it down to the earth. Paul, though, spoke of it as it exists today and said the Jerusalem which is above. Which is above. And it's mentioned also in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 12, where it's called the New Jerusalem, the very title that it's called here. And that is about the only times in the Bible that we have it mentioned by those names. Now, I believe the city itself is referred to in the 11th chapter of Hebrews. Look over there in Hebrews chapter 11 at verse 10. And there the writer says, he's speaking about Abraham and Isaac primarily, for he looked for a city whose foundation, which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Now here's a city unlike all the other cities. The cities that we see today, like Huntington and Ashland, they're built by men. Men built those cities. God didn't build them, man did. But here is a city, one that we look for. It's not down here now, but we look for it to come down. It's a city of the future. It has foundations, just like our buildings today have foundations. The only difference is that no human hands are employed in the building of that city. God is the builder of it. God will build that city. And that is the city that we look forward to having come down. There in the book of Hebrews, you go on over to the 10th chapter of the book, rather the 13th chapter of the book, and you look there at the 14th verse, and he said, "For here have we no continuing city." You know, they build a city, it may become a ghost town. Nobody live there after that. There's no city that may exist for certain forever. Have you ever thought about the many cities of the Bible that don't exist today? What about Sodom and Gomorrah? Where are they? See? What about a lot of those other places we read about in the Bible? They're hard to locate today. They're not even sure where they were. So we don't have any city that is an eternal city. But now look what he says here. "For here have we no continuing city in this present state, but we seek one to come." That's the New Jerusalem. That's the city that God has made. That's the city that will be on the earth forever. You know when that city was completed? I can take the Bible and show you. Look at the 14th chapter of the book of John. You remember what Jesus said there about his going back to the Father? He said, "Let not your heart be troubled." John 14:1. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house. What is that? That's the New Jerusalem. Called here his Father's house. In my Father's house are many mansions. Already at that time there were many mansions. But for whom were these mansions already built? Abraham. He looked for that city. The Old Testament nation of Israel will be in that city because they're the wife of God the Father. You see, in this city, you're going to have Israel and God the Father. You're going to have Jesus and his bride, the church. And so you're going to have the Father and the Son living in this great city. And other saved people living outside, as we'll see in verse 24 of this same chapter. But now when he said there, in my Father's house are many mansions, he was saying, my Father has already built many mansions for his wife, Israel. They're already there. They're already built. The city already had its foundations. Its builder and maker was already God in the day of Abraham. Now what so? If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. Now what did he mean there? He's talking about going back to heaven at the ascension. And when he goes back to the Father, he's going to build the church's part of the New Jerusalem. So he said, well, I thought Jesus just went back to do nothing. No, according to what he said there, he was going to go back. And when he went back, he would prepare a place for us, the church. And if I go and prepare a place for you, build this New Jerusalem, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. You see, when the Lord comes to rapture, he's going to take out the church, and he is going to go with them to the New Jerusalem. And they're going to be there for a while. Then they're going to come back down to the earth. They'll never go back to heaven, but that city is going to come from heaven down to the earth. And that's what John tells us about there, you see. I, John, saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem. The mansions for the Old Testament saints, the mansions for New Testament saints and the like. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for a husband. Note that he uses that word prepared. What did Jesus say? I go to prepare a place for you. Same word, see? Well, it's already prepared now at the end of the millennium, and this city is coming down from God out of heaven. People say, well, I thought we was going to go to heaven, and that was going to be eternity. No, in fact, heaven is going to be here on earth. And that city is going to come out of the third heaven back down here to the earth after it's been burned by fire. And this city will reside on the new heaven and the new earth. A whole new order is going to be made. A whole new world, unlike anything that we have today. And mark carefully the statement there, prepared as a bride adorned for a husband. Well, I'd call it a bride adorned for a husband because this is where the Lamb's wife's going to live, the bride, the Lord's church. And this indicates that the church will dwell in that city, for the church is the bride, as we saw back in the 19th chapter. And now one of the greatest statements found anywhere in the Bible is found in verse 3 and verse 4. And any man that lives in this present evil world, if he'll just read verse 3 and verse 4, he'll want to be a part of this new heaven and the new earth because it's going to be such a wonderful place to live. It's certainly a great improvement over what we've got today. First of all, it's going to have God on it. I don't just mean Jesus Christ. I don't just mean the Holy Spirit, but I mean God the Father is going to dwell on this new earth. I don't know why. Think of all the planets that God made. Not only our little galaxy, but those other galaxies and millions of other worlds and other planets that we don't even have any details on. We just know they're there by astronomy. Why will the great supreme being of the universe, why will he come and dwell on this little planet called Earth? I don't know. It's a great mystery to me. Why would God the Father come down and dwell on this earth? I can't tell you, but it's going to be the center of the universe. It's a very important planet. I can't tell you why, but I know that it's going to be here that even God the Father will dwell. Now let's read that wonderful verse. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying. Now this voice is coming out of the third heaven where the city came from. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. What is a tabernacle? It's a dwelling place. You know, over there in John's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 14, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. That literally ought to read in the Greek, and the Word was made flesh and tabernacled among us. Because the tabernacle is a dwelling place. And God dwelt among men in the person of Christ. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. That simply means that God is now present with men in this new heaven and new earth. You know, God, in a sense, has been on this earth before. He was here when Adam and Eve was here. Adam and Eve heard God walking in the garden. They were walking in the garden and they heard the voice of God out there in the Garden of Eden. During the time of the patriarchs, He would appear to men in various forms, types, and shadows. In the Jewish temple and tabernacle, God dwelt on the mercy seat between the cherubims. And there He dwelt in the Shekinah glory. During this time, He is dwelling today inside the bodies of believers in the person of the Holy Spirit. And there is a very definite sense that He dwells in the assembly of the church when we meet together as a collective body. In addition to that, it may be said, though, that God is going to dwell on the earth in a more definite and direct sense in this eternal state than He ever has in the millennial state or any time past. You see, we had God here in the person of Christ. For 33 and a half years, He walked up and down the land of Palestine. God had tabernacled on earth during that. And Jesus will literally tabernacle in Jerusalem and reign as the Son of Man for 1,000 years. But after that, not only will Jesus be here, ruling and reigning, but God the Father is going to come down. Now, I'll show you that time. Look over there in 1 Corinthians 15. This is called the time of the great abdication. It's going to be a very, very important time. And it says that God the Father is going to come down. He's going to be all in all. Look now in verse 23. You have, first of all, here you have the rapture. Then you have the end referred to. Speaking about the resurrection, but every man in his own order, Christ the firstfruits, afterward they that are Christ at His coming. Then cometh the end, when He shall deliver up the kingdom to God. Jesus rules 1,000 years. He then turns the kingdom over to the Father. See? He shall deliver up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when He shall put down all rule and all authority and power. And He must reign till He has put all enemies under His feet. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. The very next verse after the tabernacle of God is with men in Revelation 21 says there's no more death. You see, Jesus has completed His reign. He's destroyed death. Nobody will die in the new earth. Now that's unlike the millennium, because some people will die in the millennium. Not many, but some. But nobody will die in the new heaven and the new earth. Righteousness dwells there. And then he goes on to say, but He hath put all things under His feet. And then he goes on down to tell us about that time in verse 28, and when all things shall be subdued unto Him, then shall the Son also Himself be subject unto Him, that put all things under Him, that God may be all in all. So do you see the scene here? Jesus is going to rule 1,000 years until He has subjugated all angels and men down here on this planet Earth. And when He's done that, He is going to abdicate the kingdom to the Father. And God will become all in all. And that's the time that John refers to here when he said, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. Jesus has abdicated the kingdom to the Father. Death has been destroyed. It no longer will take away men from off this earth. The king of terrors has been banished from the new heaven and the new earth. Then let's go on and read the other wonderful things there in that third verse. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. Why would God dwell with men? Isn't that a great mystery? We'd rather like to think about us going to be able to dwell with God. Isn't it wonderful to think about He's going to come down here and dwell with us on this planet? And He will dwell with them, personal presence. And they shall be His people. Today we're called the people of God, but then we're going to be the people of God in a stronger sense than we are now. And God Himself shall be with them. Not only His presence, but with them to bless and to comfort. And God Himself shall be with them and be their God. Be their God. Nobody's God but our God. Isn't that something to think about? I'm not sure I can explain what all that means. That's deep. My, to think about how that it's said here God's going to dwell with men. It'd be marvelous if men could just dwell with God. But think about God dwelling with men. I can't even understand that. I can just believe it so. And then it says there, shall be their God, and we'll be His people. I tell you, only eternity will reveal the meaning of those verses. There's more there than I can bring out. It's a great thing, though, to think about. It's a great thing to think about. You see, here's another different characteristic than what you have in the millennium. In the millennium, you only have Christ on the earth. But in the eternal state, you have the Father and the Son. So it's not the same. It's post-millennial scene here because you have the two. You have the Father and the Son. Now note what God's going to do when He comes down and becomes all in all, like Paul said there in 1 Corinthians 15. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. It doesn't mean that Christ lacks the power to do it, but it's not ever said that Christ does it. It's said that God does it. I don't know why. That's just the way it's presented in the Bible. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Isn't that going to be a wonderful time when all of our tears of this present world will be over with? Nobody will ever have to cry again. God shall wipe away all tears. Why? There won't be anything to cry about. There won't be anything to weep about. In the new heaven and the new earth, there's nothing there but righteousness. Go on and look at the other wonderful descriptions there. And there shall be no more death. How many times have you seen tears at a funeral? Death brings tears, does it not? If you abolish death, you've done away with a certain amount of tears, haven't you? Funeral homes will all be out of business. There won't be any crepe on anybody's doorknob. There won't even be any graveyards left in the world because everybody's going to be raised from the dead. No dead people anywhere. Some alive in hell, but the rest are alive on the earth. There shall be no more death. Why? Christ has put the last enemy under His feet, death. He has abolished death and brought life and immortality to light. It's wonderful to think about. One day death itself will die. Death will die. Never again to plague the human race again. Why? Because in glorified saints you can't have any death. People that have bodies incorruptible like the bodies of Christ, they can't die. They're immune to death. Well, what about those people in literal bodies? They got the tree of life to eat on, and they're not going to die either. They're not going to die either. You're going to have people in literal bodies in that millennial state, but they're going to eat out of the tree of life. They're going to drink the water of life. They're not ever going to die. They're going to be just like Adam and Eve if they had not eaten of the forbidden fruit. Paradise restored. That's what we got here. Paradise restored. There shall be no more death. You know, it's terrible. Man's born and he stays in this world just a little while, seems like. He gets 50, 60, maybe 70 years old, and the Lord calls him out. His life's over. He'll never live down here again. He'll never go back to his house, never go back to his farm, never go back to the job, never do anything anymore. It's over with. But it's going to be different in the new heaven and the new earth. Not anybody ever going to die. And all the dead people are going to be made alive to live forever. I tell you, that's the time I'm looking forward to. And there shall be no more death. There's really 10 no mores in this chapter. You ought to count them sometime. The word no more doesn't occur with them, but there's not going to be any more of this or any more of that if you'll just read it. Neither sorrow, nor crying. You ever thought about when a man's born, he comes in the world crying? First thing they do to a little baby is spat him, make him cry, make him exercise his lungs a little bit. And a lot of times when men go to leave this world, they leave this world with tears in their eyes, weeping because they're leaving their family, their loved ones, their friends and the like. And there's a lot of tears in between the time a man's born and the time he dies. Job said, man that's born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Isn't that the way it is down here in this world? It's just all trouble. It's about what we have. Time of tears, dying, people dying. There's sorrow, there's pain, there's all sorts of problems. And I tell you, I like that next statement there too. Nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain. Ever been sick? Ever felt pain in your body? There won't be any of that in the new heaven and the new earth. Now, why won't there be any? Well, first of all, the glorified saints would be immune to any form of germ or harmful substance that might exist in the world. But when the world's burned by fire, it'll destroy all that. You won't have all these germs like we got today. You won't have all these germs that make people sick and cause them to die. It'll all be over with. So that's why God's going to burn it up by fire. So there'll be no germs to cause people to need to go to the hospital. So you won't need any doctors. You won't need any hospitals. You won't need any sheriff. You won't need any police, because there won't be any crime anywhere. The new heaven and the new earth, there's only righteousness. Perfect holiness everywhere throughout the whole world. Because all the sinners have been chased out of the world. God chased them out at the great white throne of judgment. I tell you, that's going to be a wonderful time. It's going to be a wonderful time. Look down at verse 5, and this may be as far as we'll be able to go tonight because I've talked at length already. And he that sat upon the throne said, evidently God the Father's throne will be down here on earth at this time. Behold, I make all things new. You know, over there, one of the verses in Isaiah said, the former heaven and earth will not come into mind nor be remembered. It's going to make it all new. We're going to forget about all these bad times. Be gone, blanked out of our mind. Gone forever. No bad memories. It would spoil heaven, you see, if we had all of that. No bad memories of the life down on earth. God has already made a new man in regeneration. He's given us a new name. He's given us a new standing before God. And He's going to give us a new heaven and a new earth to live in forever. Now, could you ask for any better than that? Where there won't be any pain, there won't be any crying, any sickness, no death, none of those things. I make all things new. Now, why do you suppose that He's going to have to make all things new? Because we've made a mess out of everything that He made and created and put down here. He's going to have to make it new. Because we've done a terrible job at taking care of what God has given us. We've defiled the planet by sin. We've defiled the atmosphere. Matter of fact, there's great problems now about whether or not the ozone layer of the earth is going to last much longer. See, man has destroyed everything God put down here. He's either, if He hadn't destroyed it, He's messed it up. He's got the rivers polluted. You can't even drink out of the rivers. They got chemical, they got sewage, they got everything in them. You cut down the trees, there's hardly any timber left to build a house out of. He's destroyed almost everything that God has put down here on this earth. That's why He's going to have to make a brand new one. We just about ruined this one completely, you see. I'm so glad, though, that He said there, behold, I make all things new. You know, Jesus tells us in Romans, the 8th chapter, that we're going to be joint heirs with Him. And then in Hebrews chapter 1, we're told that He's the heir of all things. So be joint heirs with Him is to have what? All things made new, you see. Here's God keeping His promise. And He said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. You can believe what God said. It's impossible for Him to lie. I wonder if we can really imagine what this new heaven and new earth would be like. You see, we've only seen this one here. We can't imagine what this other one's going to be like. Can you imagine what it would be like not to have any thorns or thistles or weeds to dig out of your garden? There won't be any of that in the new heaven and new earth. Could you imagine what it would be like to be able to walk out in the woods and know that a rattlesnake wasn't going to bite you? Wouldn't that be pretty good to think about? You wouldn't have to worry about anywhere you went. There'd be no lions, no mountain lions, no savage creature of any kind to do harm. Not even a savage Indian.